Hello and welcome back everyone. Over the last week or so I've been attempting to recreate an old prototype that I made during my studies at university into a fully fledged game. This has been harder than anticipated. Quite a lot of the code was good to use, but the sheer amount of things that needed to be changed was somewhat overwhelming. I almost considered just making a new scene in the original project to save me some time, but I eventually decided against it. The original project didn't have URP incorporated, and I wanted to neaten up the code anyway. So I just dove into the quagmire that was making sense of my 2-year-old uncommented code. I eventually got the hang of it and implemented some cleaner, more intelligent ways of doing things. I wanted to make sure this time that I didn't focus too much on the graphical quality of the game, but instead to get the gameplay working as well as I possibly could before getting carried away with such things. I started with the unit selection system as it seemed like the most basic thing to get right. It's basically just two lists, one of all the available units in play, and one with those that are selected. I implemented a click select and a drag select. This switches a bool on the unit that allows it to be controlled with the mouse buttons. The next thing I focused on was the tree placement. Based on some feedback from the beer and pixel community, it was explained to me that it seems strange that all the trees just appear as soon as you spawn them in. They thought that instead, in keeping with the theme, that the trees should grow over a short period of time. This also adds a gameplay element in that your trees don't produce energy at full capacity until they mature. So I have a sped up version of the animation in testing now, and I think it adds a nice gameplay element and some juice to the game. One of the major issues with the prototype is that the player can just spam trees in a single area. So I fixed that issue now as well. The player can no longer place trees if they're too close together. I wanted to create a particle effect that gives the player some feedback for placing a tree. It's an explosion with some debris and a dust particle. I decided to start designing the sound for each step of the process. Too often sound designers left until the last minute, and a developer rushes to freesounds.com just before they finish the project. I collected a range of different tree falling sound effects as well as the creaking of a large ship and put them together, as well as an explosion impact with variations on the debris hitting the ground so the sound doesn't get too repetitive for the player. This, along with the animation of the tree appearing, is beginning to feel fun and responsive. The slight chime noise at the start is satisfying. In addition, I've added a forest decor system that spawns in random forest objects around trees as they're placed to decorate the environment a little more. Currently there's just a rock and a grassy bush, but I wanted to test the system out. Next was to add the Magen production mechanic. Magen is what was called wild energy in the prototype, and is the player's main resource that they can use to purchase trees and recruit units. This is a simple coroutine that adds 1 Magen per tree every 20 to 40 seconds. I created a visual representation of the Magen being produced. Now that we have the trees working, we need some enemies to chop them down. I've started with the woodcutting enemies. These enemies spawn from the edges of the map and target all the trees in the forest. If a player unit gets too close, they will switch their attention to them. The woodcutters have 3 tiers. The loggers are the first tier, they're easy to take down and move rather slowly. Then there's the lumberjack, more health, slightly faster, and takes trees down more quickly. And then finally is the log cutter. This is a medieval saw blade on wheels. High health, high damage against trees, but very slow moving. All enemies of the same type will have the same script with different characteristics assigned to them based on their tier level. So now I have testing versions of all 3 woodcutter enemies. The lumberjack is just a duplicate of the logger but is scaled up slightly, and I gave him a little hat to differentiate him. The log cutter is a big box with a saw blade on the front. He's very efficient at taking down trees. Finally, for this tree section, we need to have fallen trees. It's no good if the tree just disappears when it's destroyed, so we need to make it look a little bit better. I added a new tree object that will start to slowly fall, and when it hits the ground we hear a thud and a particle effect is instantiated. Now the forest is starting to feel alive. So that's about it for this week's devlog. Thanks again for sticking around and watching. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'd love for you all to be part of this burgeoning community. Together we will save the forest from the evil machinations of man. Thank you very much.